billion. We've been talking that number. It's attached to the Millennium Development Goals also. You can see the number, 60 to 80 billion dollars. There's no money. Second process, huge expenditure cuts. I just flew in from California, where they're having a round-the-clock session of the legislature to decide on what to cut, because they've got to cut because they've got a budget deficit of $11 billion. That's what you spend on 1 week on your wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's 1 week's worth of war. Okay? It's going to lead to huge cuts in California's services for its ordinary citizens. And California is not only the biggest state in the United States, it would be in the top 10 economies of the world if it were treated as an economy. I mean, maybe in the top 12 or 15 economies in the world if treated as a separate nation. Right? You're crushed under a budget deficit of 11 billion, but you're fighting a $3 trillion war according to Nobel laureate Joseph Stiglitz. Third, slashing of subsidies and support from people who need the most. Fourth, transfer of wealth, systematic transfer of wealth. All these points, by the way, were written about 6 years ago and they haven't changed one bit. The systematic transfer of wealth and resources from poor to rich, it's happening today in DC. Whose money is going into bailout who? Who works under what conditions with the money? The UAW is agreeing to further cuts, further rollbacks, and the heads of GM, Chrysler and Ford fly in their corporate jets to negotiate bailouts in Congress. Actually, I think it's very unfair. I read somebody in the New York Times calling these guys, the auto industry, calling them dinosaurs. I think that's extremely uncharitable and unfair to the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs were extremely adaptable animals, creatures that ruled the planet for 150 million years. These guys are more like the asteroid that fried the dinosaurs. Then you have maybe the most important of these processes, which is central. It's unfolding before your eyes in this country. For me, this is the most central of the processes. The unprecedented rise of corporate power. Just dictating everything, rewriting every law. What was Bhopal about? It was about the coming of that kind of corporate power to India. By the way, there's a connection with farming. What was that poison in Bhopal?
Pesticides.
Pesticides. Kids are in the fields when such pesticides are sprayed. Sometimes they do the spraying, especially when it comes to cotton. One of the biggest, India's biggest cotton, one of the second biggest cotton producer. Then another process, the imposition of user fees and costs on people who cannot afford it. So you have medical tourism, because your surgeries here would cost you literally an arm and a leg. Okay, but in India you can get it done cheap, but people there can't afford to even consult about it. Very large numbers of them. Sixth process, mindless deregulation. Seventh, the process which I call the privatization of everything from intellect to soul. It's one of the intriguing phraseologies of this millennium. One word that has come back in vogue is public intellectual. Why do we use it? Because the rest have become private. So we have to mark out a guy who's not talking on behalf of Rockefeller or Ford or some other funder. He's a public intellectual. And the stunning rise in inequality that has characterized the last quarter of a century. And lastly, what I call the ideology of market fundamentalism. As religious a fundamentalism as any other, far more vicious and vehement than any other basic recruiting agency for all other fundamentalisms, because of the number of hundreds of millions of livelihoods that it has destroyed. Let me talk about this farm crisis now in 5 words. What is the Indian agrarian crisis? 5 words. The drive towards corporate farming. In a country where 60% of the population are one way or the other linked to, dependent on agriculture, we are displacing millions of people, 8 million as I said, without firing a shot, without taking bazookas, without tanks, without army, but you're crashing agriculture, tanking agriculture, so people leave anyway. Yeah? Yeah? Without firing a shot, you've got rid of 8 million people. But the thing is, not that they leave, which is one set of issues. Where do they go? How do you absorb them? What options have you given them? What alternatives have you created? I've shown you that it's not in industry, it's not in manufacturing. Where the heck do they go? That's one set of issues. So in five words, the drive towards corporate farming is what I call the agrarian crisis. How does this unfold? How does this unfold? It unfolds in terms of 5 words. Predatory commercialization of the countryside. And it represents 5 words, biggest displacement in our history. It's not from a dam, it's not from a canal, it's not from a power plant, it's from agriculture. It's the largest displacement because India has the largest body of smallholder farmers in the planet. In the United States, you had, when I last looked, 700,000 family farms going bankrupt at the rate of 160 a week. Now this means, that's an Associated Press figure, it used to be 370 a week, the bankruptcies. They've come down because the total number has shrunk. So the intensity is about the same, the base has shrunk. It also means that you have 3 times the number of people in prison than you do in farming. Because you have 2.3 million people in state and federal penitentiaries. So you have a lot more people in prison in this country than you do, and people farming. I'm not talking about industrial agriculture. Some very broad principles for understanding the agrarian crisis, which I believe is worldwide. One of the broad principles is, do not disconnect rural from urban. You'll be missing the wood for the trees. The policies are made in the urban, the fallout is in the rural. Do not disconnect rural India from urban India. That's a very big mistake. You will not understand what's going on if you exoticize the rural, keep it as something very different from the rest. That's not, it's a very bad idea. 2, do not disconnect rural from global. The global volatility of prices is affecting rural third world countries massively because for 20 years through World Bank, IMF, you have shifted tens of millions of farmers from food crop to cash crop. Cash crop is where the volatility is. Overwhelmingly, the farmers who have committed suicide are cash crop farmers. Very few paddy farmers have committed suicide. At the end of the day, you can eat your rice, even if the price tanks. It's very hard to digest corn. People have been shifted to vanilla. Vanilla has 0 internal market in India. This is vanilla nation. Most of the vanilla in the world is consumed here. But the prescriptions are governments that want money, that want loans, that want something, should export-led growth. All these shibboleths of the 1980s, 1990s. It's fascinating to read the new IMF report. For America's financial crisis, it has entirely different prescriptions. No fiscal stringency. They should spend more. Exactly the opposite of the fatwas it gave to developing nations that needed to spend. Okay? Look at their report. It's quite fascinating. Entirely a complete somersault in the philosophies advanced. The other thing is, do not disconnect agriculture from the rest of what's going on in society. That's why I spoke so much about the inequality. Now, in India, 166,000 farmers committed suicide between 1997 and 2006. Now the new data coming out bringing another 16,600. So it goes up over 108,000 in 11 years. But for the decade, 1997 to 2006, the government of India's figure